the Group 2 and welcome to our podcast. Now, let's talk about the language policies of Singapore. So what are we waiting for? Let's go!
Singapore has a multi-ethnic population and a diverse language environment. The resident population, comprising citizens and permanent residents, was about 3.6 million as of June 2005. About 75.6% of the population is Chinese, 13.6% Malays, and 8.7% Indian, while 2.1% comprises other ethnic groups. There are 4 official languages: the Malays, Chinese, Tamil, and English, and the national language in Malayu. However, in daily life, English is the language of an administration and the common language spoken by Singaporeans of various races. Mandarin is widely used among the Chinese population in places of other Chinese dialect, such as Hokkien, Teochew, Cantonese, Hakka, Hanais, and Fochu. Beside Tamil, other languages spoken by English population include Malayalam, Punjabi, Telugu, Hindi, and Bengali. The vernacular languages of Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil are important as the home languages of Singaporean. However, since the last population census in 2000, there has been an increase in the use of language as the predominant home language among all the major ethnic groups in 2005. Among the Malays, the better educated shows a great tendency to speak predominantly English at home compared to 5 years before. Nonetheless, Malay remained as the principal home language of Malays at all educational level. Among the Chinese, Mandarin had become more popular as the predominant home language, while the use of Chinese dialect at home had declined. Although there has been a grateful shift towards speaking English at home, there was a greater tendency to switch to Mandarin in place of the Chinese dialect than to switch to English at all educational levels. For the Indian, the increase in the use of language as the predominant home language occurred mainly among those with secondary or lower education qualification. Among Indian, university graduates, in contrast, the proportion using predominantly English declined. For this group, the proportion using Tamil at home increased and was close to the proportion using English at home in 2005. Among the resident population, English is emerging as the language of the young. With more students from primary school to university level speaking English at home compared to the vernacular language, the Malays, Mandarin, Chinese dialect, and Tamil between 2000 and 2005, there was concomitantly a decline in the proportion of resident students speaking the vernacular languages at home.
The bilingual policy in Singapore. The bilingual policy requires all students to study both English and a mother tongue language from the early years of primary education through the secondary level. Primary 1 to secondary 4 to 5, ages 7 to 16. English is the principal medium of instruction in schools with the exception of civics and moral education and mother tongue languages. The study of an official mother tongue language, which is Malay, Chinese, or Tamil, is compulsory for students in Singapore. Mother tongue language is one of the compulsory examination subjects for the primary school leaving examination, or the PSLE, and the General Certificate of Education, or the GCE, with a 3-level of examination. The first one is the normal, the second one is the ordinary, and the third one is advanced. However, from secondary 1 onwards, students who face exceptional difficulties in coping with Malay, Chinese, or Tamil may request to offer Malay language syllabus B, Chinese language syllabus B, or Tamil language syllabus B. Syllabus B curricula are easier, but serve the important function of ensuring the students who struggle with learning Malay, Chinese, or Tamil still have opportunities to learn one of these languages at a more manageable level. Compulsory education was implemented fairly recently in Singapore, commencing 1st January 2003. The objectives are twofold. First, it is to ensure that our children learn core knowledge which will provide a strong foundation to further education and training. Second, it aims to give our children a common educational experience which will help to build national identity and cohesion. However, even with the introduction of compulsory, the responsibility of sending children to school and ensuring that they attend school still lie with parents and with the community playing an active role to help them, if necessary. Singapore's bilingual policy in education was instituted soon after independence in 1965 and has been in place for about 40 years, while many changes have taken in place in the education system, including policies, education structure, and curriculum. This policy has remained largely unchanged in its essence to this day. As Singapore has a centralized education system, there are monitoring mechanisms as well as resources dedicated to the implementation of this policy. Yet, one of the major challenges faced by Singapore students is the demanding nature of learning two languages from the early years of primary education. For most primary school students, at least one of their home languages will be used in school because provision is made for the teaching of the four official languages. In a small number of cases, and particularly for recent immigrants, neither English nor the official mother tongue languages are spoken at home. However, for the vast majority of students, the challenges they face in learning two languages stem from the fact that the standard variety that is taught in school is often different from the colloquial variety that is spoken at home. Furthermore, at least for the first 4 years of primary education, all students are expected to learn to read and write as well as to speak.
The multilingual texture of Singapore. The indigenous people of Singapore are the Malays. Even though they only account for a small proportion of today's population, they have inhabited the area that is now Singapore since as early as 13th century, which predates the arrival of Chinese and Indian migrants during British colonial rule. Many of the indigenous Malays live on the island under the Johor Sultanate prior to the arrival of Raffles. These early immigrants were mostly from the Malay archipelago, from Malacca, Sumatra, and the Rayu Islands, and later also from Java and Bawin Islands, as well as Sulawesi and other islands. Most of the Malays in Singapore today have their roots in Indonesia and Malaysia. They were the largest ethnic group in Singapore until the 1930s, but their numerical dominance was swiftly surpassed by the Chinese. According to the 29th census, Malays constitute 15% of the resident population, making them the second largest ethnic group in the city-state. The Malay language, also called Bahasa Melayu, has been recognized as Singapore's national language since independence and is mostly used within the Malay speech community. Virtually the entire Malay population speaks Malay, and despite there being an ethnic minority in Singapore, the status of the language is not threatened, as Malay is not only one of the official languages in the city-state, but is also the national language of Malaysia and Indonesia. Singapore has always been an attractive destination for people from mainland China. Chinese immigration to the small island of the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula has a long history. First traders and settlers can be supposed to have traveled to what is today Malaysia and Singapore as early as 1000 AD, often staying and marrying local Malay women and later establishing the economically successful group of Peranakans. Chinese immigration surged when the British established Singapore as a trading post in 1819 and as a separate crown colony in 1867. Among the first settlers with Chinese roots were Peranakans from Penang and Malacca. Later, and with the increasing demand for labor, a continuous stream of mainland Chinese began to make their way to Singapore. Later, and with the increasing demand for labor, a continuous stream of mainland Chinese began to make their way to Singapore, first settling in what now is Chinatown and subsequently spreading across the entire island.
Now, let us discuss about some issues of language policy in Singapore. The language policy of Singapore is highly centralized, and they are trying to find ways to effectively implement it. However, there are two major reasons as to why the Singapore government tried to implement such language policy. One is for ethnicity, and two is for economic development. Now, let's discuss each of them. As for ethnicity, the Singapore government wanted to implement their mother tongue in order to ensure that their culture will not vanish, nor they wanted to avoid excessive Western culture and deculturization. Singapore has many races who lives in the place, and these are the Tamils, which the language has spoken by the Indians. We also have the Malays, which has been spoken by the Malays, and lastly, we have the Mandarin Chinese. Now, these languages has been in conflict with each other, but since then, according to the Republic Act of Singapore Independence Act of 1965, these three languages, the Tamil, the Malays, and the Mandarin Chinese, has been given of equal status of importance because they wanted the people to anchor in their culture and to prevent deculturization of Singapore. On the other hand, for the second reason, they adopted the English language as a means of economic prosperity and development. English language is the lingua franca, or the international language of the world, and thus, in order for the Singaporeans to increase their industrial processes and their economic development, they have to communicate with other people across the globe, and that is why they adopted the English policy. As I have mentioned before, there are actually many languages in the Singapore that exist together, and the three official languages are the Tamil, the Malay, and the Mandarin Chinese, along with the English language. Thus, the Singapore government proposed a law, which is in order to implement these languages into one, they decided to at least make it an official language. Now that Singapore has 4 languages, they call it as a multilingual policy, which gives rise to multilingualism. Multilingualism refers to multiple language exists in one country or has been spoken by one person. Now that we know some language policy of Singapore, let us discuss about its issues. And one issue of this language policy is actually quite strange. For instance, when we define mother tongue, it is considered as the first language, and the language acquired by the student, which is foreign to him, is considered as the second language. But this is not always the case in the Singaporean context. For example, there is an estimation that English is actually the first language learned by the Singaporean instead of the mother tongue. This is actually quite very confusing to us, but according to the former Minister of Education, Tony Tan Kim Yan, says that Singaporeans must learn English language to open windows of information, technology, and economic development. While what he said is actually true, but still, it does not answer the fact why Singaporeans' first language is considered English instead of their official languages. But nevertheless, the Singaporean students were actually taught English, and English is actually given more importance than their official language, the Tamil, the Mandarin, and the Malays. Now, another issue here is that about the concept of mother tongue. Many Singaporean students, the way they communicate and the way how they use their languages, their official language cannot be determined based on the first language they have been taught, but rather their official language must depend on the ethnicity of the father. For example, if a Singaporean student's mother speaks Mandarin, but the father speaks of Tamil, then the official language of that Singaporean student or child will be Tamil and not Mandarin because of the ethnicity of the father. Now, because of this logic, some Singaporean students called out that instead of calling it mother tongue, why not call it a father tongue? Because in the sense that the official language might depend not on the mother's ethnicity but the father's ethnicity. And this actually is an issue because we can tell that Singapore is actually a patriarchal society in which men rule and women have no voice in it. But regardless the case, these are some of the issues that Singaporean language policy has faced. But there were actually more improvements which later on we will discuss about the language shift. So now, let us talk about the language shift. Because of the language policy issues of Singapore, there arise many official languages that the Singaporean must learn. And however, the way the Singaporean government and the Singaporean citizens face this issue is the way how they use language effectively in different situations. For instance, a Singaporean student who learns Tamil and Mandarin who happens to talk with another Singaporean who does not understand Tamil but speaks in Mandarin. Thus, both of them will use that Mandarin language in order to communicate and understand each other. So there is actually a language shift in which the student might use their official language depending on the situation in which it arises. And that is what the Singaporean government tries to do and the way they handle the problem. That solution is the language shift of the language policy itself. Now that we know about the language policy issues and the language shift of the Singaporeans, now let's compare them of the language policy in the Philippines. Both Philippines and Singapore is a unique country, and across these countries there are many multiple ethnicities speaking with different languages. And that is why there is a need of language policy to make sure that language will be implemented effectively by the government and be used by the people. So now, what are these comparisons and in contrast? The language policies of Singapore and Philippines is quite similar and at the same time quite different. So let us discuss about the similarities first. The first similarity is that both Singapore and the Philippines is actually an English-speaking nation country due to the fact that the government gave prioritization on English language in order for them to communicate internationally. According to the Article 4, Section 7 on 1987 bilingual education policy in the Philippines, it states that for the communication purpose, Filipino will be used as a means of communication, and otherwise than provided by the law, English will be used. So we get an idea that in the Philippines, there are actually two official languages. We have the Filipino and the English, which is quite similar to the Singaporean languages, which they are required or has been compulsory to speak in English. Now, another comparison with them is that the way they have promoted mother tongue. Now, Singapore has a law which states that every Singaporean student must learn mother tongue in order to remember their culture. And these are the Tamil, the Malay, and the Mandarin Chinese. And when it comes to the Philippines, Filipino is considered as a national and official language in order for the Filipino to have a sense of national identity, and this arose from the sense of unity. As Philippines is an archipelago country which different ethnics speak with different languages, there is a need of one languages which will unite the Filipino people. Now, let's talk about the differences of language policy. Unlike Singapore, Philippines has only two official language, which is the Filipino and the English. While on the other hand, Singapore has four official language, which is the Malay, the Mandarin, the Tamil, and of course the English. And unlike the Philippines, Singapore actually adapted these three official language except English in order to anchor the Singaporean citizens of their culture and to avoid deculturization and to be swallowed by the West culture. But in the Philippines, it's actually a quite different story. In the Philippines, the sense of national language has been arised by Manuel L. Quezon in order for the Filipino to have a single language spoken in the Philippines in order to create unity. And unlike the Singaporeans, the Filipinos were actually trying to unite every ethnics of the Philippines, and that is the goal of the bilingual policy. Another difference is that even though Filipinos have spoken English, the Singaporeans were actually much more fluent than the Filipinos themselves. Because according to the laws or the bilingual education of the Singapore, the Singaporeans' first language is English, while on the other hand, the Filipinos' first language is not English but their native tongue. There's actually a quite of contrast between the two of them. But most of all, that's only the differences that is actually cleared between the two countries. But the most common fact is that the biggest similarities between the two countries is that they use English as a medium of instruction. They use English to provide economic development in their countries and for industrialization purposes. And just like the former Minister of Education of Singapore, which is Tony Tan Kim Yang, he states that English is a window of information, technology, and economic development. And there's no wonder why Philippines also adapted the English language in order to industrialize its economy and of course to communicate amongst the world's affairs as not to be left behind. So these are the comparison and contrast of both countries.
In Tamil Language Review and Recommendations, the vision of Tamil Language Review is to ensure that Tamil remains a living language among future generations of Tamil Singaporeans and vibrant part of Singapore's identity. However, achieving this vision will require fundamental shift in the way Tamil is taught in schools. The Tamil language is diglossic with a formal version used in both speech and writing and a spoken version used in less formal interaction. Formal Tamil is used widely in Tamil language classroom and is the form used for oral examination. It has led to students, especially those from English-speaking homes, and not being comfortable using Tamil to communicate in everyday setting where spoken Tamil is the norm. Going ahead, the following recommendations have been made. First is position spoken Tamil as part of the Tamil language curriculum. Second, adopt differentiated instruction, especially in the first few years of primary instructions. Third, use engaging pedagogy to promote greater interaction among students in the classroom. Fourth, expand the duration of acquiring the Tamil alphabet from 1.25 to 2 years old. Fifth, improve instructional materials by incorporating Singaporean content. 6. Develop supplementary reading materials to address the current lack of interesting reading materials. 7. Effect of shift towards the use of spoken Tamil in oral examinations. Similar to the Chinese and Malay languages review communities, the Tamil language review community also recommended the enhancement of teacher training and various ways of engaging community, organization, and the media in promoting a Tamil-speaking environment.
The main aim of Chinese language review is stimulate student interest in the language to motivate them to use it long after they leave school. A key challenge is to adopt an approach that is sufficiently differentiated and customized so that all students of Chinese intensity, regardless of their home language background, are able to access the Chinese curriculum and develop a love for the language as well as competency in using it communication various city. For those who are able to master the language, it is imperative to develop their capabilities to the fullest and broad objective of using Chinese to transmit traditional culture and values is still relevant. But it should be achieved in a flexible and natural way that will appeal to student interest and imagination. The main recommendation of the committee are: number one is adopt a modular approach to the Chinese curriculum at primary level. Number two is place more emphasis on the practical use of Chinese for communication. Number three is provide more engaging and relevant instructional materials. Number four is enhance the learning of Chinese through the use of information technology. Number five is review the examination format to reduce memorization and rote learning. Number six is augment recruitment of Chinese teacher and enhance the attractiveness of teaching Chinese as a career. Number seven is create more opportunities for students to use Chinese in school context. Number eight is involve the community and media in creating more opportunities to use Chinese outside of the school. Malay language review recommendations. The Malay language in Singapore national language as well as the important regional language for the Malay community. The learning of Malay is critical for the transmission of cultural knowledge, identity and values. Keeping the language alive is essential to Singapore multi-racial identity. Further equips Singapore to seize opportunities in fast-changing region. The main aim of Malay language review is to ensure that the Malay language and culture is preserved as well as further enriched by its community. A language and culture that is striving and constantly enriched will contribute further the Singapore distinctiveness and identity as an Asian society. The recommendation of the Malay language review are guided by the overall vision of Arif Budiman, that is the learned person who contribute the society. The main recommendation are: number first is provide a greater focus on the development of strong oral skill among students. Second is use differentiated instruction to cater to Malay students with varied home language backgrounds and abilities. Number three is revise the Malay language stimulus to articulate clearly the desired learning outcomes. Number four is focus on developing engaging instructional materials and the use of information technology to enhance learning. Number five is revise examination requirements to reflect curriculum changes. Number six is expand existing Malay language programmers to encourage more students to study Malay more deeply. Number seven, enhance pre- and a service teacher training programmers to deepen teacher knowledge of Malay literature, history, and culture. Number eight, engage community organization and the media, encouraging a high standards of spoken Malay.
English language review and recommendations. While English is the medium of instruction in all our schools and used widely outside the school, the current standard of English needs to be enhanced. Language and communication demands have increased considerably with Singapore's growth as an open, knowledge-based economy and with the development of new service industry. Similar to the
Mother Tongue Language Review, the English Language Review also focused on making changes and refinements in curriculum, pedagogy, instructional materials, assessment, and teacher training. The new English language curriculum to be introduced from 2009 aims to build a strong foundation in grammar and spoken English, and to be enrich language learning through the use of engaging and age-appropriate material for reading and writing for all students. Teacher training will be strengthened through the inclusion of content upgrading and pre-service and through ongoing in-service courses.
In conclusion, the government has accepted the recommendation of the Languages Review Committees and has dedicated resources necessary to implement the proposed changes successfully. Going ahead, the various recommendations will take some time to be fully implemented. Notably, recommendations pertaining to changes to the syllabus, instruction, materials, and national examination. Some of these, such as changes to examination requirements, have to be carefully studied and pilot tested. Curriculum planners and developers are currently working on the new curriculum materials as well as studying the impact of the initial stages of implementation. For the new modular Chinese language curriculum, studies have shown encouraging results. For Malay, new initiatives has been announced to encourage more non-Malay students to study Malay as a third language through the Malay Special Program and conversational Malay lesson. For Tamil, more Tamil language centers have been set up and greater opportunities to study High Tamil have been provided. The new English language curriculum will be implemented in 2009, and the outcomes of the changes to be the syllabus can only be determined later. The current changes do not represent a final solution to the changes of implementing bilingualism and biliteracy in education. New ideas and new technologies will emerge, as will new findings about effective pedagogy and education practices. To keep pace of a changing world, the ways in which languages are to be taught and learned will have to be constantly reviewed and studied.
And that's all for today, and we hope that you learned something from our podcast. Thanks for watching.
Bye!